with Latin American Spanish in Portuguese language and cultural forms. Now, how do people do it? It's something that I would encourage everyone to go look for books about Latin American cultural policy. With so much political turmoil, economic stress, and difficulties, they've got a culture much better than the rest of the world. Right? And more. You actually see that there is a mixture of a lot of things. Right? There are also quite a lot of countries in Latin America that are also socialists, or fluctuate between capitalist and socialist values and systems. There are strong socialist local initiatives. They can often be truncated by political suppression and brutal military repression. Right? But sometimes they get supported and funded from different kinds of sources. And one interesting specimen is this book from 1972, 1977 actually, might have been, How to Read Donald Duck, written by Argentinian scholars. And it tells the story of how America supported military governments, cracked down on freedom of expression and political freedom in Chile and Argentina. And all at the same time, when America gives them the guns to control and oppress the people, America also wants Latin American ordinary people to like America. And it was at the time when America was fighting the Cold War in Asia, and they did not want Latin America to rebel against them. So they want to promote an image of America as very friendly, harmless, do not need to be scared about us US people, although we're giving your dictatorship the guns to control you, right? So they commissioned, actually the CIA, I'm not sure whether it's a foreign policy bureau as well, funded, contracted Walt Disney to promote a positive teen, silly, okay image of America, so Latin America. And they started creating this Donald Duck comic books in Latin America, which became quite popular. And the socialist local initiatives was a big number of Chilean, Argentinian artists began drawing their own comic books to compete with Donald Duck and won. And the people actually liked their own artists' work a lot more than Donald Duck. And at that point, these people, the scholars who backed this whole, the artists and the scholars who backed this whole project, this socialist local initiative, were actually deported and kicked out of their country, become political exiles. And this book was written while they were kicked out of their country because they draw too well. So you see all these kinds of things happening, despite a lot of difficulty. And there was also cut on cultural funding that are actually relatively less. So they would rather cut funding on education and welfare, and they don't cut as much on cultural funding. And there's a very interesting political decision that requires a lot more study. I don't understand it yet. But when the government needs to decide what money to cut, they would rather cut education and welfare more and cultural funding less. Why? So there is also a huge class gap protecting local cultures and practices from intrusion because they're so poor and their languages are so different. And nobody messed with their culture and they survive culturally. So there's also a mass quotidian participation in culture in everyday life. A lot more people dance very well, a lot more people sing very well, a lot more people knows how to recite poetry and write poetry and so forth, despite their poverty and despite their lack of education. Okay. Very, very strange differences from the capitalist West. And there is also racial and geographical resistance to being subsumed, right? By bigger national foes. So a lot of local variety survive. And in the 1930s, right, there are, of course, also negative examples, and that's 1930s Argentina. And they're different or less vibrant at that time. Go back to the Hong Kong story. And dissertation, which interviewed a lot of local artists. And in one of the interviews, there was a case that really struck me a lot about the status of Hong Kong artists today. So there is a young artist who goes to the bank and wants to open a bank account.
No, I think
So,
you know
that one.
I know her.
Okay.
Actually, I know that.
And what happened was the bank asked her, "What is your profession?" She said, "Painter." And the person asked the second time, "What is your profession?" And she says the second time, "I'm a painter." And the clerk goes through the list of professions, the choices, can't find it. Go to the manager at the back and ask, "Which should I take?" And in the end, the person checked the box, surface industry. And then after surface industry, there are some subcategories, and asked the artist to choose from the subcategories. Then there was none called painter. So the clerk actually chose for the artist something closer to others, something closer to others or the rest. Okay. So it's impossible to identify the existence economically of a painter. So it took her half an hour to actually start this account, right? And all the time spent on defining systematically, institutionally, what a painter is. So, but it wasn't like that before. It wasn't really like that before. The status of intellectuals and artists in Chinese culture has always been very, very high. And it was only another cultural admiration, respect, and weight that our culture actually gives to people of the arts fell from that topmost place in the hierarchy to one of the lowest. How does that happen in Hong Kong culture? It is not natural. There is a history of cultural policy that manufactured the identity of Hong Kong as a cultural desert. From there to a cultural desert. It's a very, very, very big sea change of values. So I'm going to skip a big part of the lecture about some concepts that I will pick up later on, and I'll move to this historical background of Hong Kong cultural policy section. Look for that. Let me tell you, around panel 30 something. Now, there is a situation that we started seeing that you might remember. Instead of starting from the earliest time, I want to start somewhere that you might, as a child, have some memory of. And that was the elimination of the urban council and regional council. Urban council and regional council was publicly elected bodies that takes care of cultural policy in Hong Kong, used to be. And they have real power to decide on policy and real power, money, to actually execute what they have decided. And the urban council and cultural regional council are actually people who have been elected by public election, like the district council. Now, why did we keep a policy like that?